So, do you want to talk about?
Yes,
we'll get this onto it first.
Matching. I really, really liked it. So it was weird. Like, it felt like a bit nostalgic. So obviously I didn't grow up in Airdrie, but I grew up in West Lothian. And I think like every wee town in Scotland is exactly the same. Like they have exactly the same people. It's exactly the same environment. So it was like reading about when I was at school, like, and I obviously wasn't in the young team because I was a goth. So, but like we had like this park, and they obviously spoke about how they went to this wooded area to drink, right? And that's where we would go. And like there was an ash path beside it. And so he was talking about the ash path. I was like, got you. And like we would have like half the park where us goths would be, and then like the young team would have the other half of the park. So like we were still sort of in that environment occasionally, although I wasn't part of the young team. Although we had to be a wee bit different in Whitburn, so we didn't just have the young team, we also had what we called the Whitburn Loopy. And that was the young team in Whitburn's name, so they got a wee bit more creative.
I think because when I read it, I grew up working class and I can see elements of it, and I think it's strange how the generations don't really change.
Mm-hmm.
I think he showed that really well, but parts of it I think was so realistic, sort of, but I could see that that's what happened sort of around me, even when I was
gin delivery.
Even when like I was young, I wasn't part of a, do you know what I mean, like a team, as your Scottish people would call it, but you knew people who were, and as you grew older, you knew the people who were sort of probably more associated with the football sort of teams as they are and whatever. So I think he just captured it all. I think there's a bit in it where they'd been somewhere and they'd ran away, but then they were still running through the streets chanting who they were, sort of thing.
Aye.
And I think his writing is very good at like building up the tension, even though you know what's going to be happening. He sort of builds up the tension of it really good, I think, because it's a debut, isn't it? And I think it's really, really, I think he just captures it all. But I listened to it as well on audiobook, and Graeme Armstrong reads it, and you can tell he's got a passion for the story. So when you got to the chanting bit, he actually chanted it along.
Aye.
Sort of thing. Because the audiobook was easier for me not understanding the Scottish dialect 100%.
No, that makes sense. It's really Scottish dialect heavy, and I love that. Me and Simon have had this conversation like a lot, because he did like children's literature as part of his university degree, and like they did a full section about like the language that's used, and like specifically because it was in Scotland, whether or no like children should be given books in school that have got like the Scots dialect, or if they should be given books in school that have got like just proper English. And I really, really like it when I see how I talk represented in a book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's something that I've really recognised about myself until the past couple of years. Like there's some books that I'll just get like so intimidated by, and I'll be like, oh no, like I could never read that, like, because it's me, and I'm like, I'm an idiot. But then like if it's a Scottish book and it's a Scottish author, I love picking it up and just seeing my dialect reflected in that. So I loved that it was so Scottish. Like it's the same with like Chris McQueen and Limmy. Like they just use like such Scottish words and Scottish phrases, and I love that. I thought that he did it really well, so that if you're Scottish, you'd like resonate with it, but then if you weren't Scottish, you could still work out for the context what the words mean, so it wasn't inaccessible if you weren't Scottish, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, definitely, because I think it reminded me a little bit of reading Trainspotting, as in you you sort of had to get into it. And I think if when I was younger, when I read Trainspotting, if there was an audio book of it, that's the way probably I would have went. But I ended up reading Irvine Welsh's like omnibus. There was 3 or 4 of these novels together in one go. And then I went to read the next book I went to read, which obviously was in English. I couldn't understand, I was like, what's this? Because I just read like these 4 stories back to back that were all in the Scottish dialect. So that's what I like about it, that it is written in that dialect. And I think that's one of the good things, because I've started following him on Instagram, and the amount of people that's engaged with the story because of the way that it's written. And I think in a way as well, he writes a very positive story and outcome for people, in a way. Is that probably a spoiler? Probably.
No, that's all right. We do spoilers, so it's fine.
So, do you know what I mean? Like, some of them don't, but some of them do. And I think that'll probably help, being in that dialect for that group of people who may feel a bit lost and not represented, to be able to read it. Because I know he's engaged with like the prison population and the gang population. So look, there is a different way, but I don't think he's romanticized it at all. He's shown every single aspect of what can happen if you're part of a team like that. He showed the whole sort of, some people get out, some people don't, some people are half in and half out because their lives change, but they don't truly leave the area that they're from.
Yep, I know, I totally agree. I think that he's done it really well, and I think that as well, like, I can only obviously talk about where I was from, but I'm assuming Airdrie's going to have been the same. But like, that group of people, like in that age category, like they would just like never pick up a book. Like they would slag people off if they read, because they weren't engaged with our education, because frankly, like, our education system is shocking and teachers just don't really care. And so they would never have thought to have like picked up a book. But then I think that with writers like Graeme Armstrong coming across and writing about their own experience, it would maybe encourage them to pick it up. Like, and then if you're maybe somebody who is still in that lifestyle and you read it, then I could maybe give you hope that like you could get out of it.
Definitely, because I think he's been quite honest with that. It's not autobiographical, but it's sort of based on what he knows growing up and the experiences that he had. And I think he's shown every sort of aspect of it, like the supportive teacher, the non-supportive teacher, the friends that go in lots of different directions as you get older, the realities of being in there. But he's a really good writer to sort of the place where they hang out. I could really visualize that. And then on Instagram, there was actually a picture of where it was. And I thought, that's exactly like how I imagined it, based on how he described it sort of in the book.
Well, I'm going to look for that now and see if I can see the picture.
And I think a lot of people have sort of resonated with it, Scottish people as well, but sort of other people who sort of been in that working class culture of that's what it's like.
Yep, absolutely. I think what really sold it for me as well, like, is when he spoke about like his mum, like Azzy's mum, and like his friend's dad, and his friend's dad had been there in a young team, and now he was older. Like, and I know these people. Like, I could imagine, like, all right, so that's so and so, and then that's how they got into it. Like, I could totally visualize folk in my town, like who they were in relation to this book. So it was just like so believable. He wrote the characters really well.
I think as well, for being a male writer, for being a male writer, I think he represented the girls who were around them really well. And I think what showed is that Azzy's character had respect for the girls around him due to the fact that he was brought up by a single mom, and what she had sort of brought him up to be like. He sort of treated girls with respect, and do you know what I mean? They were probably tougher than him. He had this
Aye.
sort of idea that, you know what, the girls are actually tougher than I am, and he sort of admired, I can't remember her name, but his little girlfriend, she might not have been little, but do you know what I mean? His girlfriend, like, he respected her for being just so like, no, I'm going to college, no, I'm doing this, no, this is what I'm doing.
Yep.
And I think that it would have been pink and fluffy if they'd ended up, oh, it's another spoiler, isn't it? If they'd ended up being together, like all pink and fluffy, but they didn't, because she was a strong enough girl, like, I'm going off and I'm going to do this, and if you don't want to do it, then I'm leaving you behind, like, I'm gone, sort of thing. So I really enjoyed the way that he represented the women and the girls around it as well.
I agree. I think that it was really well represented. Like, I think that it would have been so easy to have written these sort of chavvy, slutty characters and just have them no really be part of the story and just be the side characters, where I feel like you really did bring them in.
Like a hang on, like these girls hang around for the prestige and whatever, but I mean, even some of his girl characters, he would, like, as he would say, oh well, she's going out with him because he's got a car and he's got this and he's got that, but he was also then explaining, because that's her way out.
Aye,
that's her way out. She's going to marry the middle class lad that she's met, because that's her way out of where we come from.
Aye, absolutely. I thought that he did the female characters really well, to be honest. It would have, and again, like, even when he had other characters in the young team sort of make comments to him, like, oh, who you getting your hole off, and like, oh, like, so and so's a wee slag, and he'd be like, well, no, actually, like, and so it was good that he had him sort of speaking to the rest of them about like how he would treat women. So it was nice to see him sort of put them straight and be like, no, and then he'd be like, oh, aye, but he doesn't mean it like that. It's just because he, like, the way that he's been brought up and his dad talks about women and blah blah blah. So I thought that was really good, and it was really interesting.
Which was your favourite part? Which is the bit that you sort of think about if you think about it? Which is the bit that you go to?
Well, I don't know if it was my favourite part. It's quite a dark bit, but the bit that's
the fact that that's your favourite. Probably someone dies.
It's probably when he like realizes that he has like a proper drug problem, and he's like, he talks about obviously getting the fear and like getting the panic attacks and stuff, and he's like, Ken, I've been drinking for I was 12 and I've been smoking weed for I was like 14, and I've been doing that every single day, like, because I think I had the sort of realization when I was reading it. And obviously, I don't know if it's the same for you, but I was reading it and I knew that you had read it. So I was thinking about you as I was reading it. And for me, like, the fact that they had been drinking for such a young age and had been smoking weed for such a young age, and then had went on to like coke and ecstasy and stuff like that, like, is just standard here. Like, and certainly where I grew up, that was standard. Like, that's no abnormal where you're like, oh, you're a wrong'un. That's like fairly generic. Like, that's like everybody sort of like, so but then reading it and thinking, oh, Ancha's read this as well, I sort of found myself wondering about like if it was just a Scottish thing, and if that's just how things are in sort of small town Scotland, or if that's the same in other parts of the UK as well. And so for me, I was like thinking, oh, well, if it's no the same for Ange, then she'll be thinking like this is a proper traumatic thing, like, and like, oh, she'll be concerned for these bairns. Like, whereas for me, I was just reading it and thinking, oh, like, that's fair enough, like, that's just what you do. But then, like, when I started realising he had a problem, it was like I almost came to the realisation that, like, I'm so desensitised to that level of drug use because it's just normalised in your society. Like, it's just sort of what you do at the weekend. It's no seen as oh, that's actually illegal. Like, you wouldn't go out and murder somebody at the weekend, you know that that's illegal. But then, like, I don't know, drug use is almost just kind of normalised in society, especially I feel like in small towns. So it was just like a realisation for him and a realisation for me at the same time. So I was like, oh, wait a minute.
Don't worry, I don't think it's just Scottish people. You're all right. No, but I think you're right in what you say, that if you're reading it, you think, oh, this is all, if you're not from maybe a working class background where you sort of you do whatever it is you do, like you it used to be YTS in my day, that's how old I am. You go to, you do your school, or you go to your training program, or you do your job, and then you get to Friday and Saturday and Sunday is sort of like this is where you let loose, and this is it is part of the norm that this is what happens. I've never really been into that side of it, like drink isn't bad enough do you know what I mean? But I have been around people in that culture where that's what happens. And I think sometimes when I say working class, it's not just working class people. Sometimes the middle class kids are just they're in the same situation. And I think that's maybe what it highlights as well, because he does bring these middle class characters in who are part of the scene and then just disappear because the families get them out, or it's not, so they've had the fun and whatever, and it's like their family can get them out and get them help, or their family sort of get them, where some of the other families, they're already in that cycle, so it becomes generational.
Aye, absolutely. It's just a trend for them. This is their actual lifestyle. Like, they'll not have the opportunity to just go, all right, well, I'm done with this, I'm hanging up the berge and, you know, cracking on. Like,
where I live now as well, we've got a dean behind us, and still sometimes in the summer, not all the time, but they'll come round and they'll sort of sit behind where we live, do you know what I mean, with the cans and whatever, and I'll sit in, what they're up to, and go, they're young. Do you know what I mean? As long as they don't start doing anything bad, like really bad, just let them be. Because there's nowhere else for them to go, and I think that's what's highlighted in there as well. There was nowhere else for them to go apart from a derelict building where they were really just hanging out with themselves. I know, like, this is how old I am, when I was younger, there was like youth club was still there, and this was still there, and I think that sort of eroded as you got through the 80s and then into the 90s, and then it was sort of gone. Like, it definitely in my area, there's nothing really for place. Like, Holly's now 15. There's nowhere really for Holly to go to with our friends apart from either our friend's house, or if they want to go to like something that they're paying for, like the cinema, or do you know what I mean? And that all costs money, and that's a barrier. So what are they going to do? They're going to get together and they're going to sit together somewhere.
Of course. Yep.
Because there's no other choice for them, and I think it sort of represents that well. What I did find a good comparison to, which you're probably interested in, is that when he moves away and he goes to Gateshead. Now, I know Gateshead, Sunderland and Newcastle all have a similar sort of place about them, to the point where I can see the northeast in the Scotland that Graeme Armstrong showed. Right. Yep. So the fact that as he got away and he went to Gateshead, but he became this whole new person, to me, that I was thinking, you're probably living next door to someone who's just like you, but in Gateshead. Mm-hmm. And if that person moved to Scotland, they would then become Aussie, because nobody knew who they were. There was no expectation of them. I think it's when he goes back and there's this expectation, always back, what are you like, even though he'd become a different person. So that was a good comparison to me, because I was thinking there's probably a northeast writer that could write something very similar to what Graeme Armstrong's written, based in Gateshead. Mm-hmm. That would be very realistic and relatable. People living like in the tower blocks, the kids being involved in gangs and drugs and stuff. So that was a good comparison, because his safe haven was actually somewhere that is actually quite similar to where he comes from.
I know it is. It's a dead interesting thing. Like, my entire family grew up in Whitburn, and so like there are family members of mine who have been in the young team. And so like I've seen them grow up, and like it's dead difficult. So like there's one family member in particular, like was in the young team, didn't bother about school, in hundreds of trouble, fights, everything, that drink, drugs, you name it, they were up to it. And then left school, tried to sort of get past that, and like couldn't, because it was exactly like the older ones in the book. Like you just kept getting pulled back into the drama, and then if somebody battered one of your younger ones, you need to battered one of them, like, and you just like couldn't get away from it. And then like they did go away for a bit and they did try, but then it was like every time they came back, like there was almost that expectation, oh, you're so and so, right, well, this has happened, that's happened, you have to give me honours. And like I've absolutely seen that struggle firsthand, and I think that he wrote it really, really well. And it almost is like there is that resentment if somebody leaves and somebody's actually able to succeed, because it is like, oh, but were we no good enough for you? Oh, so we were good enough for a time, but we're no good enough now, and I helped you then, so how will you no help me now? And it's like they can't see past themselves almost, because they are stuck there. So I know it's a really interesting point, and I think that he did do it really well, just showing that when you get away and nobody knows you and there isn't that expectation that you can maybe thrive and succeed, it's definitely a look what can happen when you get away from your town. Kind of book.
It's like the label that you have, because when he was in Gateshead, he wasn't part of the young team, he wasn't Azzy. Do you know what I mean? He was in college, he had a girlfriend, he had a stable sort of life, and that's how people perceived him. So that he had none of that historical sort of background to him. That's why I think it was just interesting, I think, for me, that he came to a place where I know if you'd actually been born in Gateshead, you would have still been Azzy, probably.
Aye.
And so that's why I got it. And I think as well that it wasn't a glamorous sort of thing either. I think it was quite realistic. And one of the bits that I really, you can't say really loved, because it's quite like, do you know what I mean? But when he came back and then he thought he was going to be jumped, but it was actually his friend who was just so into the lifestyle he was in, sort of thing. And it was like you could feel, I think Graeme Armstrong wrote really well, how you could feel how uncomfortable as he was with being with them now, although they were still his friends and he wanted to help them, but he probably knew he couldn't. And like even when he offered them a lift and he was like regretting offering them a lift, but like all the emotions involved in that, I think he came out really, really well. That he was then thinking, like, who were they? I think it's the same when he went to visit his friend, when he went and his parents were so happy that he was there, and he went into his friend's room.
Yep.
Just to be sort of honest with you, like, what are you doing with your life? And I think that was even, do you know what I mean? I think he did write that really well, that like unsettling feeling when it's only sort of one decision that could make this my life, just one different decision at some point, and this would be me, or that would be me. I think he sort of mirrored it really well, the people around him, of the different avenues as he could have gone down.
I know, I would agree. I'd not thought about it like that, but it's actually really interesting.
I think they were all just so different, but they all still were like friends and stuck together, sort of thing. There's that bond, isn't there? I think.
Aye, the camaraderie.
and I think some of it was quite heartbreaking, and I think he did that really well, and shown that side of sort of life, like when they were coming back from going fighting somewhere, and then the police were looking for them, like for one of them, but because something had happened at home, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I think he represented the police actually quite well, as in, on any other given day we would be trying to round you up, but would need you because of this. but the fact that they knew him because of all the trouble that had been in also meant that the police came and like protected him from what he was going home to. I think he wrote that quite well, which I wasn't expecting, sort of thing, for that representation to be in.
It was very similar in Whitburn. So like our school was that bad. We had police stationed in our school. Like they had an office in our school, and like we were allowed to, we would call it going up the street, like, which basically just meant we could leave the school for lunch. But because there would be that much violence and drugs and everything, like the police officers would basically walk the streets while we were up there for lunch, and then they would come back to the school when we came back for lunch, just so they could keep an eye on things. And like Whitburn was quite bad for vandalising as well, so maybe folk would go up the street for lunch and they'd maybe like smash a shop window or do a wee bit graffiti. So it meant that the police were there to obviously monitor that. But I think that the police officers that got to know us for being at the school, like I wouldn't say more lenient, but like they had a wee bit more understanding, because they knew that was the type of environment that we were coming from, and that it was something that was really difficult to get away from. Like, so then they almost had a sort of understanding that, like, right, well, you're only doing these things because you're in this situation. So I think he portrayed that really well, because obviously they still have a job to do, but they did know your name, and you know, like they would know you for this and that, and but they sort of that there was like an understanding there between the two of you almost. It wasn't like how sometimes police officers, I think they can come across as quite judgmental, and everybody just thinks like they're the bad guys, but actually they're just people too, and they have a job to do, and if you break the law then they'll need to do their job, but they can sort of understand why you've done what you've done sometimes. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I think that it's probably, especially in the smaller towns in Scotland, quite accurate as to how the police force can be.
Yeah. I think I gave it 5 stars, didn't I?
You did, yeah.
I think you're going to just think, if we throw anything Scottish at you, you're going to give it 5 stars. But I think it's because it's quite close to living in the northeast. I think that the sort of generational problems that the teams, as you call them, like that go around, and then highlighting things. But I think I really enjoyed as well his description of when they went to the rave. When they went to the big rave. I think that was just I think he captured that sort of time as well, where he just lost all of his friends but just befriended someone else, and that's what happened. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And I think he just captured that really well. I think it's just the atmosphere. I didn't get quite, I had to Google some of like who the trendy dance music was, because obviously I'm too old, but I'm too old for some of that. Do you know what I mean? But I got the sentiment around it about, because that interested me as well, because I think reading this, I recognised things that I did. And I think I'm about 20 years older than you, so I recognise things, but every generation thinks that they're the first ones to have done it. And I remember like parents and stuff saying that to me, oh, you think you're the first ones who've ever done that? You're not really.
No.
Maybe different style of music or a different whatever, but you're not the first. Every generation goes through the same thing, just with different like cultural points of reference along the way. But I enjoyed that. I just I love the idea that they all got in this minibus to go to this big rave, because this was this big moment in their life. I just loved it.
It was really good. It was well done, and I like as well, like I think that there are so many films and books these days that when they do have like rave scenes, they like almost glamorize the drugs. And it's like you see them take it and then they're like, oh, euphoria, and they're just dancing away and loving life. And like I think that there was an element of that, because that's obviously how it feels when you take it. But then you also had the very real aftermath of I've taken too much, I am feeling too hot, and then I'm getting taken to the room, the gouge room, as they called it, like for people who were basically just on the come down and who had been sick. And like, I think it was good that he had that part of it as well, because it isn't all about the highs, it is about like what happens when you're done with the drugs or when you've taken too much of the drugs. So I think that he did it really well. I don't think that you could read the young team and think, oh God, I could go a wee line. Like, like, you know, you read it and you're like, no, definitely no for me. And I think that that's really good, because I do think that there's a lot of media that glamorises it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think he represented all the people, like the volunteers who were helping him, sort of the way that he portrayed them and sort of thing, and the sort of respect as he had for them in a way, like these people are giving up their time. Do you know what I mean? He sort of explained, I think, the culture to people who may have not understood that, because a lot of people think, if you've never been there or known anybody who's been part of the rave culture, that, oh, it's just a bunch of people and they get high and do you know what I mean? I wasn't really into the rave scene. I was more of an indie chick myself.
I was the same. I was a wee goth, so I was into the headband music, you know. I wasn't really
I had friends and family members who that was their scene, so you sort of know. I mean, we used to go out, like, this is back in the day when clubs closed at 2, you see. We used to get kicked out at 2:00, and we were waiting for our taxis, eating our cheesy chips and whatever, and the rave club around the corner would at some point, either the police would go and raid them because they were breaking the 2:00 curfew that pubs had back then, before all day drinking became a thing.
Amazing.
And we used to sit eating our chips, going, oh, they're gonna like raid the rave club now. They're going to turn they're going to turn the sound system off, and all the ravers are going to come out. And then the warden would all just, you know, eating our cheesy chips, waiting for the the taxis home. So the different groups of friends are like, where you be? Well, have it, because like, if you like different kinds of music, you go to different places. And a lot of people that I know, like, they used to say to me all the time, oh, alcohol's really bad for you. Because they wouldn't drink. Like, they wouldn't drink alcohol at all. And so they've got, you know what, alcohol's bad for you. You binge drinking, it's not good. So it's just different perspectives, though, isn't it? And different things. Like, they would never think of going out and getting drunk because it's bad for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I rated it a 4-star, so I didn't get a 5-star. The only thing I think that was missing for me was, obviously, you were on this entire journey with Azzy, and then, like, he comes to this realisation that he's been doing the drugs for too long, like, and he decides he needs to kick the habit because he's getting the fear, like, and he's just like, nah. And I think that was a great realisation for him to come to, but then I just feel like it almost wasn't a struggle for him to come off it. Like, I just felt like that almost happened too quick, and I think that I would have just liked a wee bit more detail into that. And like, I know he spoke briefly about, like, obviously I think he says, like, it would always be difficult for me being around pals who took drugs frequently, but I just feel like there could have been so much more put into that. Like, how many times had you thought about just saying, I pass me that joint, like, and like getting into the depth of the struggle? I think that would have been really beneficial for people who were maybe in a similar position to him. And I think later on in the book, when obviously Kenzie's struggling, and I think he's on heroin at the time, and he's really struggling and letting his life go, and he has sort of similar conversations with him, but I would have just liked a wee bit more of that outlook for Azzy himself, because then it would have made more sense when he went on to help his friends and stuff, how he had came to these realisations and his experience with it, whereas I felt like it just jumped a wee bit for A to C, and we didn't really get that B. So I would have liked more of that, and I think if we got more of that, it would have been a 5-star.
I'd be interested to know whether it was sort of written like that and then edited down so that that part was given to a different character sort of thing. But I can see what you mean, that the realisation and the jump was quite fast. But I think I gave it 5 stars, I think, because like as a whole, I could really see like the whole picture of it, I think, and maybe seeing the different characters as a different path to Azzy. Like Azzy's the main character, but he could actually be any one of these other characters that's in here. I think that's how I'm like why I give it the 5 stars that I made, and it may not be right, but that's the connection I made, sort of thing. That this is my story, but I could be one of any of these people.